Grandparents walked me down the aisle instead of my dad. He threatened to disown me. I, 26F, never thought I'd be posting here about my wedding, but recent events have left me feeling conflicted and in need of advice. I've decided to invite my maternal grandparents to my wedding and have them walk me down the aisle. This decision has caused a huge uproar in my family, particularly with my father and stepmother, who are furious and adamantly against their presence at the wedding. To understand the situation, I need to provide some backstory. My mother passed away when I was 6 years old. At the time, I had 2 younger siblings, a brother who was 4 and a sister who was 3. I have clear, vivid memories of my mom, but my siblings were too young to remember her as well as I do. 2 years after my mom's death, my dad remarried. My stepmother, Linda, entered our lives when I was 8. From the beginning, our relationship was strained. I never felt a connection with her, and I struggled to accept her as a maternal figure in my life. Unlike my younger siblings, who adapted more easily to the new family dynamic, I always kept my distance. I never called Linda mom or any variation of it. I always addressed her by her first name, which I know bothered both her and my dad. They constantly pushed me to see her as my new mother, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. My resistance to accepting Linda as my mom caused frequent arguments and tension in our household. My maternal grandparents played a crucial role in helping me cope with the loss of my mom and the changes in our family. They were a constant source of love, support, and connection to my mother's memory. They understood my struggle to accept Linda and never pressured me to see her as a replacement for my mom. This support from my grandparents didn't sit well with my father and Linda. They saw it as undermining their authority and preventing me from fully embracing our new family unit. The tension escalated to the point where my father and Linda tried to limit my grandparents' access to me and my siblings. It was a difficult time for everyone involved. My grandparents, determined to maintain a relationship with us, took legal action to secure visitation rights. After a lengthy and emotionally draining process, they were granted 1 day a month to spend with us. While it wasn't ideal, it allowed me to maintain a connection with my mother's side of the family. Growing up, I looked forward to those monthly visits with my grandparents. They were a respite from the tension at home and a chance to feel close to my mom's memory. We would look at old photo albums, and they would share stories about my mom that helped keep her alive in my heart. As I got older, the divide between me and Linda only grew wider. While she tried to bond with me through shopping trips and girl talks, I always felt like she was trying too hard to replace my mom. I appreciated her efforts on some level, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was more focused on creating the perfect family image than truly understanding my needs. My siblings, on the other hand, grew closer to Linda over the years. They started calling her mom and seemed to genuinely see her as their mother figure. This further isolated me within the family, as I felt like the odd one out who couldn't move on or adapt. Throughout my teenage years and early adulthood, family gatherings were always tense affairs. I tried to be civil with Linda for the sake of peace, but there was always an underlying current of resentment and misunderstanding between us. My dad often accused me of being difficult and ungrateful, unable to see how much Linda had sacrificed for our family. Now, as I plan my wedding, all these long-standing issues have come to a head. When I announced my intention to have my maternal grandparents walk me down the aisle, my father and Linda exploded with anger. They see it as a direct slight against them and a rejection of the family we've become. My father argued that he should be the one to walk me down the aisle, as is tradition. Linda insisted that by including my grandparents so prominently, I was disrespecting her role in my life and the years she spent raising me. They both feel that my grandparents have no place at the wedding, let alone in such an important role. I tried to explain that this decision isn't about rejecting them, but about honoring my mother's memory and acknowledging the important role my grandparents have played in my life. My grandparents have been there for me through thick and thin, and I want them to be a part of this special day. My fiancé has been supportive of my decision, understanding the complexity of the situation and respecting my wishes. However, he's concerned about the family drama overshadowing what should be a joyous occasion. I'm standing firm in my decision to include my grandparents, but I can't help feeling guilty about the pain it's causing my father and Linda. Part of me wonders if I'm being selfish or if I should compromise to keep the peace. At the same time, I feel like this is my chance to honor my mom's memory and have the wedding I truly want. I've spent so many years trying to navigate this complicated family dynamic, and I don't want to compromise on something so important to me. I'm torn between my desire to have the wedding I want and the pressure to appease my father and stepmother. Am I wrong for insisting on having my grandparents walk me down the aisle? Should I give in to keep the peace, or stand my ground? Any advice would be greatly appreciated as I try to navigate this emotional minefield. Update 1: It's been a few days since my last post, and I wanted to provide an update on the situation with my wedding and the ongoing family drama. After my decision to have my maternal grandparents walk me down the aisle, things have been incredibly tense in our family. My father and stepmother, Linda, have been relentless in their attempts to change my mind. They've tried every tactic they can think of, from guilt tripping to emotional manipulation. One particularly difficult conversation happened when my dad called me over to their house. He sat me down in the living room, with Linda hovering nearby, and launched into a long speech speech about family loyalty and tradition. He reminded me of all the times he had been there for me growing up, the sacrifices he had made as a single father before marrying Linda, and how hurt he was that I would choose my grandparents over him for such an important moment. Linda chimed in, her voice trembling with emotion, about how she had always tried her best to be a mother to me, even when I pushed her away. She talked about the school events she attended, the meals she cooked, and the times she stayed up late helping me with homework. It was clear they both felt deeply betrayed by my decision. I tried to explain again that this wasn't about rejecting them, but about honoring my mom's memory and recognizing the important role my grandparents have played in my life. But my words seemed to fall on deaf ears. They were convinced that I was being selfish and ungrateful. When they realized that their emotional appeals weren't working, they changed tactics. My father and Linda decided to involve my fiancé, hoping he might be able to persuade me to change my mind. They invited us both over for dinner, and I could tell from the moment we arrived that they had an agenda. Throughout the meal, they kept steering the conversation towards wedding planning, dropping hints about how nice it would be to have a traditional ceremony. Finally, my dad turned to my fiancé and asked him directly what he thought about the situation. I held my breath, worried about how he would respond. But my fiancé, bless him, handled it perfectly. He calmly stated that while he understood this was a complex family matter, he fully supported my decision. He told my dad and Linda that if having my grandparents walk me down the aisle was important to me, then it was important to him too. I could see the disappointment and frustration on my dad and Linda's faces. They had clearly hoped my fiancé would be on their side, and his support for me seemed to catch them off guard. After that failed attempt, my father decided to play his final card. He called me the next day and told me that if I didn't cancel the invitation to my grandparents, he would withdraw all financial support for the wedding. I was shocked that he would go to such lengths, but I stood my ground. With shaking hands, I called my grandparents to tell them what had happened. I was worried about how they would react, feeling guilty that they had been dragged into this mess. But their response surprised me. Without hesitation, they offered to cover the entire cost of the wedding if my father followed through on his threat. They told me that they had been saving for this day since I was born, and they would be honored to help make my wedding dreams come true. Their generosity and unconditional support brought me to tears. It was a powerful reminder of why I wanted them to be such an important part of my wedding day in the first place. Armed with this information, I called my father back. I calmly explained that while I appreciated his offer to contribute to the wedding, my grandparents were willing to step in if he chose to withdraw his support. I made it clear that either way, my decision about the aisle walking would not change. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in my father's head as he realized his ultimatum had backfired. Finally, he spoke, his voice tight with barely contained frustration. He said he would think about it and get back to me. A few days passed without any word from my dad or Linda. The silence was uncomfortable, but I tried to focus on other aspects of wedding planning to keep my mind off the family drama. Then, yesterday, I received a text from my dad. It was brief and to the point. "We'll be at the wedding. Do what you want." It wasn't exactly a warm acceptance, but it felt like a small victory nonetheless. I know this isn't the end of the issue. There's still a lot of hurt and resentment simmering beneath the surface, and I'm worried about how things will play out on the actual wedding day. But for now, I'm trying to focus on the positive. I'm marrying the love of my life, and I'll have my grandparents by my side, honoring my mom's memory as I start this new chapter. I'm grateful for all the advice and support I received from my previous post. It helped me find the strength to stand my ground and stay true to what I believe is right for me. As we move forward with the wedding plans, I'm hopeful that maybe, just maybe, this experience will lead to some healing and understanding in our family. Update 2: The big day finally arrived, and I wanted to share how everything unfolded. Despite all the drama and tension leading up to the wedding, it turned out to be a beautiful and emotional day that I'll cherish forever. The morning of the wedding was a whirlwind of activity. I woke up early, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. My bridesmaids arrived at the hotel suite we had booked for getting ready, and the air was filled with laughter and chatter as we started our preparations. As my hair and makeup were being done, I couldn't help but think about my mom. I wished she could have been there, helping me get ready and sharing in this special moment. But I felt her presence in my heart, and I knew that having my grandparents there was the next best thing. My grandparents arrived at the suite about an hour before we were set to leave for the venue. When they walked in, both of them looked so elegant and proud. My grandmother was wearing a beautiful pale blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes that were already glistening with tears. My grandfather looked dashing in his suit, and he was beaming with joy. As soon as they saw me in my wedding dress, they both burst into tears. My grandmother hugged me tightly and whispered, "You look just like your mother." It was a bittersweet moment, filled with love and a touch of sadness for the person who couldn't be there. We arrived at the venue, a beautiful garden with a white gazebo where the ceremony would take place. As I peeked out at the gathering guests, I saw my father and Linda taking their seats in the front row. They looked tense, but they were there, and that meant a lot to me. Finally, it was time for the ceremony to begin. As the music started and my bridesmaids began their walk down the aisle, I took a deep breath and looked at my grandparents. They each offered me an arm, and with a nod, we began our walk. The path to the gazebo was lined with white rose petals, and as we stepped onto it, I felt a surge of emotions. With my grandparents on either side of me, I felt like I was carrying a piece of my mom with me. Their steady presence gave me strength, and I couldn't help but smile as we made our way down the aisle. I caught glimpses of the guests as we walked. Some were smiling, others were wiping away tears. When we passed my father and Linda, I saw a mix of emotions on their faces. There was hurt there, but also a softness that I hadn't seen in a long time. As we reached the end of the aisle, my grandparents each kissed me on the cheek before placing my hand in my fiancé's. It was a symbolic gesture, passing me from one phase of my life to the next, and it felt perfect. The ceremony itself was beautiful. We exchanged vows that we had written ourselves, and there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. As we were pronounced husband and wife, I felt an overwhelming sense of joy and peace. During the reception, I made sure to spend time with both my grandparents and my father and Linda. It wasn't always comfortable, but it felt important to bridge the gap, even if just a little. To my surprise, I saw my dad and grandfather shaking hands at one point, and while it wasn't exactly warm, it wasn't hostile either. As the night went on, filled with dancing, toasts, and celebration, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had led to this day. The family drama that had caused so much stress in the lead up to the wedding seemed to fade into the background. What remained was a sense of love, not just from my new husband, but from all the people who had come to support us. One of the most touching moments came during the father-daughter dance. I had decided to split the dance between my dad and my grandfather. When I approached my dad for his turn, I could see the emotion in his eyes. As we danced, he whispered, "I'm sorry for everything. I know this day is about you, not me." It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it felt like a start. Dancing with my grandfather afterwards, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. He told me how proud my mom would have been, and how honored he and my grandmother were to be part of this day. As the reception came to a close and we prepared to leave for our honeymoon, I felt a sense of closure. By having my grandparents walk me down the aisle, I had honored my mom's memory in a way that felt true to me. And while it had caused some family strife, it also seemed to have opened the door for some healing. I know that one perfect day doesn't erase years of complicated family dynamics. There's still work to be done in my relationships with my dad and Linda. But as we drove away from the venue, my new husband's hand in mine, I felt hopeful. This wedding wasn't just the start of my marriage, but maybe the start of a new chapter for our whole family. To everyone who offered advice and support through this journey, thank you. Your words gave me the courage to stand by my decision and have the wedding that felt right to me. As I embark on this new adventure of married life, I carry with me the love of my mom, the support of my grandparents, and the hope for better days ahead with all of my family.